Hey, everybody. As we grow closer to, May the 4th be with you and the eventual release of Rise of Skywalker on Disney Plus, here we go with the next of our Star Wars trilogy of commentaries. See, I told you we would get back to this after Civil War, but with that said, we're doing this pretty much the same way as last time. Malik and I both have our own, copies or ways of watching the movie queued up. If you'd like to watch it along with us, then what you should do is you should get your own version of the movie up to timestamp 0. And when I say now is when we will collectively unpause. So this is, like The Force Awakens, our second attempt at doing this commentary. I really liked the conversations that we had last time, and I hope that we, were as good this time. So if you've got everything set up, then we will begin the movie in three, two, one, now. So, yeah, I don't know. It's been long enough since our last attempt at commenting over this movie that I hope, we were not too conscious of that through the whole time. With The Force Awakens, it was pretty much a week or less than a week between our attempts at that commentary, so we were kind of constantly thinking about that. But I don't know. We did discuss, as we usually do, our thoughts coming out of the theater. What was that like for you the first time seeing this?
Well, as you know, interestingly enough, I wouldn't technically have first thoughts out of the theater because I didn't see this in a theater. I saw this on my ship. When a Disney executive flew out to our ship and gave us a private screening of the movie because myself and a lot of like diehard Star Wars fans were bummed that we were leaving and weren't going to be able to see it when it came out. And so a Disney exec flew out there and gave us a private screening. There was popcorn machines and chairs set out, and um, there was like a concession for drinks and everything. And they played it in the projector in the middle of our hangar bay, and it was really cool.
Honestly, the way that everyone should be seeing every movie.
I don't know about that, um, but it was definitely a really cool and surreal experience. Um, so the first time I enjoyed this movie purely because um, I was just so shell shocked by how I was seeing it.
Right.
Um, and I almost wasn't. I mean, I was paying attention, but the story of this movie, I couldn't immediately tell you what that was because I would just. It's a lot to take in, and like I wasn't even planning on watching this movie. Like I had not prepped myself to see this movie before seeing it, and so the first time I saw it, I didn't really know how to feel. Um, I did know that I did not like what was done with Rose. I knew that I thought it was kind of unfortunate and weird. And even though this movie was trying to be subversive, it in some ways really doesn't feel subversive when you think about Empire Strikes Back and how divided our heroes are versus how divided the heroes are in Empire Strikes Back. And I felt like in that way, while I was trying to get away from that and avoid those comparisons, it ended up falling into a lot of those comparisons the first time I saw it. And I still liked the movie the first time I saw it. Um, But as time has gone on, and the more times I watch the movie, I feel more and more mixed about it, and yet have a harder time articulating why I feel so relentlessly conflicted about this movie. So you can go ahead and give your thoughts on how you felt coming out of the theater.
Yeah, just to talk about yours for a minute. A lot of people, I think, come out of this movie really conflicted. Like this is a very, very divisive movie, and I don't know because I'd heard mostly the positive reactions before I went in, so I'd allowed myself to be kind of excited for it. And like I didn't have a vested interest in Star Wars as a franchise. Debatably, I still really don't. But when I'd also seen reactions that were like, oh god, this movie ruined Star Wars canon and like burning T-shirts for this movie coming out of theaters. And I was like, unless this is like straight up garbage, that's probably not going to be how I feel about it. So I'm just going to sort of take it on its own terms. And immediately it grabs me. Like, immediately, like with this scene that a lot of people dislike, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This is kind of like a dialogue exchange that's not like anything else in a Star Wars movie, and I'm kind of on board with it. And that's really how I feel with this whole thing. Like, I gotta wonder if I would have reacted to this movie differently if I were like a major Star Wars fan going in, because so much of my initial intrigue with it in the theater was, oh, I came into this thinking, okay, Force Awakens was pretty neat. I enjoyed that movie. This is probably going to be another fun Star Wars movie. And then this isn't really like any other Star Wars movie. And I really appreciate that about it. And I'm kind of in the opposite camp to you, where as I watch it more and more, I just find more and more things to love about it. And we've discussed at length sort of like the issues with Rose. And I think where we ultimately came down on, and we'll talk more about it, of course, when her character shows up, is her last scene and how that's maybe problematic. And I don't disagree with you on that scene, but in general, I really enjoy Rose's character.
Um, I can't help but just be more or less apathetic in regards to Rhodes for the majority of this movie. Um, but I'm also really conflicted on Poe and his whole plot with General, why am I blanking on her name? Pink haired
Holdo?
lady.
Admiral
Yeah,
Holdo.
there we go. Admiral Holdo. Yeah, I still don't know how I feel about that. And like her keeping like what the actual plan is a secret because it's not even that great of a plan in the first place. And I don't know. I don't really like that. It's like we're playing this whole scene as like super heroic and like Poe is doing the right thing here, even though he's getting a lot of people killed. And then we go back on it. Well, not go back on it, but we act like um, he made the wrong call the second that he gets back to the rest of the resistance. And Holdo's jumping down his throat, and to a degree, so is Leia.
Well, I don't think that's a problem at all.
I'm
Like,
not saying
I
it's a
don't.
problem. I'm saying I don't know how I feel about it. Like because I don't I don't like that her plan is really no better than the plan that Poe enacts with Finn and Rose, even though their plan does not work.
Hmm.
I really
I don't know. We can discuss that as we go along because I have thoughts about that, and I have a whole video that's kind of about that. But yeah, there's nuances to that discussion to be had. But I think this whole sequence is just really cool. And this right here, what Ryan Johnson refers to as the Star Wars Tokyo Drift moment.
well, it is nice that we're immediately giving Poe kind of front and center presence in this movie, since he is kind of the Hawkeye of the first movie. Not that he gets mind controlled or anything, but he's introduced and then quickly dropped for a lot of the movie.
Yeah, he kind of, and like we discussed the reasoning for that, as like they didn't entirely plan to have him be part of that movie, and then he just kind of was, or like a part beyond the first act, and then they were just kind of stuck with him. But this movie definitely takes advantage of the fact that, like, okay, we're keeping him around. He's a character that a lot of people seem to enjoy coming out of The Force Awakens. Oscar Isaac is giving a really cool, charismatic performance. Let's give him some stuff to do. And I personally like. I should have like opened with this. This is my favorite Star Wars movie. I think all of the characters in this movie have their best character moments here, but him in particular, comparing this to Force Awakens, where he's barely present past the first act, and the next movie where all of the characters got screwed over, I think he gets some really cool stuff to do here.
Um, I would have to, this is obviously fairly I don't know what the word is, but my favorite Star Wars movie that I have to say is not Rogue One, as I was saying previously, because going back to that movie finally, I like it um plot wise, and that we end that movie with even though they're able to get the message out to Leia, they all still die to do it. Like they don't really win. Um, and that was refreshing. I love that movie more for the ending, the atmosphere, and just feeling like an actual like legit war movie. Um, but the characters, a lot of the characters are really drab, really bland, don't get great arcs, aren't super memorable, and so um, I would have to say by default, my favorite movie is probably Empire Strikes Back. Oh, nah, not Empire Strikes Back. Force Awakens. I think Empire Strikes Back is a better movie, um, but Force Awakens is more enjoyable and easier for me to watch.
That's understandable. And that's actually interesting in regards to this movie because a lot of people's more negative reactions to this movie are rooted in a place of it it like turned its back on the storytelling in The Force Awakens or betrayed that movie. I don't think that makes any sense. And especially when you hear it from like professionals working on these movies, I think that's in really poor taste. Like some of the editors who worked on Rise of Skywalker straight up like saying, well, we were trying to sort of like bring it back after The Last Jedi threw out a lot of The Force Awakens. I'm like, one, that's not what this movie does at all. And two, that's just really unprofessional to kind of like throw this movie under the bus like that.
Yeah, maybe it made a lot of story decisions that like classic Star Wars fans just didn't like. Like people obviously people act like the Snoke, like there was so much interesting stuff to do with Snoke, and I'm like, okay, he's the big one of the big mysteries of Force Awakens, but he's just a Palpatine stand-in, and Palpatine is by no means an interesting character in the first place.
Yeah, and that's also that mindset and like the mindset that the Snoke thing and anything else this movie did is like the betrayal of The Force Awakens comes from this really bizarre, simplistic mindset toward the whole mystery box thing that we've been discussing that I just don't understand, which is that like people got on this movie's case who didn't like it for like and people praising it for quote unquote subverting expectations. And like yes, subverting expectations by itself is not like a praiseworthy thing, but at the same time, the people whose complaints with Snoke and stuff are like, oh, how could you betray The Force Awakens like that by taking what it set up and then doing nothing with it? No, getting rid of Snoke is not doing nothing. Like taking Snoke and taking some of the Luke stuff and all those things and like doing what they did with it is not doing nothing. People act like if the mystery box doesn't get like if the mystery box of who Snoke is or who Rey's parents are doesn't get the answer that they want or doesn't get an answer at all, that that's like throwing that out. No. Choosing to do what they did with it is doing something. It may not be what you wanted, but you can't say that that's like throwing out The Force Awakens. JJ made that movie. Ryan was given the task of making the follow up, and he follows it up. He doesn't follow it up in the way that maybe JJ would have, but he furthered the story.
And that's fair. I do want to talk about Finn because
Mm.
he's one of my big issues with this movie. Um, I think, well, first of all, um, he does not have, in my opinion, he does not have an organic interesting arc in this movie from beginning to end. Meaning, I don't. So in the first movie, in Force Awakens, his motivation was self-preservation and I want to be with Rey. Um, he he ends up with the Resistance not because he truly believes in the cause, but because he cares for Rey and he wants to be with Rey. Um, Now over the course of this movie, he decides to like the plan. I get why he decides to go through with the plan, um, but I don't buy that we get him to where we get him by the end of this movie. What has changed that he's now willing to die for the the resistance when what he wanted from the last movie to the beginning of this one is to be with Rey. That hasn't really changed. And if it's changed, we don't get a good indication or reason as to why.
And I
I don't buy over the course of these events that he's suddenly changed what he wants.
and I completely disagree with that, like 100%. And I don't know how much I should go into that here, since that's
Yeah,
not the.
yeah, we can talk about the fan scenes when we get back to them, but
I'll
the
briefly
one,
say that I just think that part of like that perception of it is maybe the reason people have issues with like the Canto Bite stuff being quote unquote useless and filler, because the Canto Bite stuff is the answer to that question, and we'll get to that when we get there.
I don't even think that's enough. That's part of my issue with that whole thing. But the big kind of controversial thing that people don't like in regards to Luke Skywalker, that I actually do. I mean, I'm not in love with it, but I like it. I think it works. The reason that we come up with for why he decided to, leave the order and isolate himself and all the stuff with him and Rey, I think is pretty solid. Um, this is actually some of the strongest, like deep character stuff in the movie.
Yeah. And like I love it, I completely love it, and I'll briefly touch on this because this is a choice that I can understand people being sort of torn on or
The big thing
disliked.
was it's not my Luke. Luke wouldn't give up. He wouldn't.
Well, right now I'm talking about this, like the cutting away from he asks where's Han and we cut here.
That
The
feels really cheap.
Yeah, and like I don't believe it was within this scene, but later on we will have a scene that was originally meant to cut between Leia and Luke as they're both mourning Han. And I believe the reason that Ryan gave for why they ultimately cut that out was a structural one, which was like it was good to have a connecting scene between Leia and Luke before that later part in the movie where they connect through the Force, and B, it was good to have Luke mourning Han, but also he was really dedicated to the idea of not like quick cutting between places and like letting scenes breathe, and once we're in a location we stay there for a while. And he felt like I believe I'm getting this right. It's been like a month or so since I've heard his reasoning, but I believe the reasoning was we are in the Leia scene, we're on the ship, it feels kind of awkward and forced, and it hurts the structure and pacing if we are cutting to Luke amidst all of that.
Maybe that's fair. I kind of would like to see the alternate version and decide for myself. The
Yeah.
ultimate cut. I know we don't do those for Star Wars movies, and I completely understand why. Um,
I'm sure someone's made a fan edit of like reinserting the deleted scenes, especially since they're now all available in high quality.
yeah, and thankfully, Disney actually puts a lot of those on Disney Plus along with the movie.
Mm. And so this is why we like have Snoke in this movie in any capacity, and people are like, "Ow, they wasted him." This movie does, I think, the only interesting thing you could have done with him, which is that much in the same way that Kylo Ren is trying to be Darth Vader and failing. He tries to be Palpatine and fails, insofar as he tries Palpatine's like classic tactic of like pushing this sort of on the fence, like wayward spirit to his side by like preying on his weakness and his insecurity. And what he thinks is going to happen is it's going to end up like Palpatine and Vader, where he's going to eventually mold Kylo Ren into his perfect sort of lapdog, but that doesn't quite work out for him. And I think, again, not to praise subversion for subversion's sake, but this movie's method of taking the fact that so many people know that that's how Darth Vader's story goes and saying, okay, what if these characters were trying to recapture that and they couldn't quite make it work?
Um, there's something awfully ironic about doing that, but yeah, I do like that idea.
And we should have kept the mask broken.
I agree
Like,
with that.
I don't care what the next movie does. I don't care. That mask needs to stay broken. But yeah, so I meant to talk more broadly about Luke and like people's issues with that. But the thing there is, and you'll hear again, this is part of people being like, "Oh, why would you do this as a follow up to The Force Awakens?" I'm like, what else could they have done? Like, especially after our last commentary and really paying attention to what they were saying, it's it's really the only thing that I think could have possibly happened. Like, you can argue the specifics of like him and Ben and what happened in that scene and like the Rashomon sequence when we get to it. But people get on this movie's case of like, oh, Luke is he gave up. Oh, he's like a pathetic like a hermit. He's cut himself off from the Force. He doesn't want to take part in the war anymore. He doesn't want to be a hero. That's not this movie's fault. That's the Force Awakens problem. If you see it as a problem, that movie tells us in plain terms Luke made a mistake or something happened and he blamed himself and he turned himself away from everything. He cut himself off from the Force. Like Han tells us all of that across like two separate scenes. So we know Luke is not in a good place coming off of that movie. What did you want him to be like in this one?
Oh, you're gonna give me my lightsaber back? Well, let's go kick some Empire butt.
Yeah, no.
Like that was not even remotely the movie I was expecting. And granted, at this point, I'm not a huge Star Wars fan anyway, outside of Clone Wars. Um, so I was not looking for a lot from this movie in the first place. I was just looking to be entertained, and largely I was. Now I do have my issues with this film. A lot of them are tonal, and I remain conflicted on like playing with the idea because that's not something that we do in Force Awakens. And I know Ryan Johnson is taking liberties and he wants to tell his own Star Wars story, but playing with the idea of Rey going to the dark and Kylo potentially going to the light, that's something the movie makes such a big deal out of that, like one of them turning, that it the biggest disappointment for me is that neither of them do. Um, and I'm and I like I do like where this movie goes after that, but you know how I feel about it. I feel like there was a much more interesting movie um, in the event where one of them is actually forced to switch, or maybe even is just convinced to switch of their own volition.
Well, see, I don't know. I think that depends on what you're looking for because I think it's really interesting again, and you can argue the meta angle of like how much of these characters hoping that the other one will switch is okay, we know that Star Wars is basically monoculture and everyone knows that Darth Vader had a turn, so we're going to have the characters be sort of semi-aware of that.
But
But
he's really the only big turn.
yeah,
Like
But
Um,
he's so
but yeah,
big.
Luke rejects him. Well, Luke rejects Vader. Um,
Well,
Ahsoka,
it's not even just that. I'm maybe making it sound more simple than it is because Luke does reject him, you're right. But characters like offering other characters the chance to turn has always been a thing.
yeah, but we never do. Well, like the big switch happened one time. It happened with Vader and Sidious, but it really hasn't. There's not a big switch past that.
Yeah, but like Vader offers Luke, Luke offers Vader, Palpatine offers Luke. It's so like offering that switch has been a constant thing, and like just to what I think is more interesting about this movie, I'm sure that if one of them did make a turn, then that would have been plenty interesting. But I think there's just for the purposes what you're suggesting, one of them turning would have been interesting as lead up for the next film. And that's something that like Red Letter Media suggested as like their big thing, which I never agreed with, was how cool would it have been if Kylo holds out his hand and then cut to credits and we don't get an answer. I think for the
Uh,
purposes of this movie and what this movie is trying to say, I think it's more interesting that they both want the other to turn and they're both just not right about that. And by the end, they both come to a sort of weird, still totally opposite version of a gray area where we end this movie with Kylo being like, no, like you turn, I turn. This can't be about that. We both have to join forces as like just rejecting everything else because the Jedi and the Sith and the Empire and the Resistance, all of it is a problem, and we need to be our own thing. And Rey comes to a place of like, that's not right. But at the same time, maybe there are some things about the Jedi and the old order that need to sort of like go away. And I really like that. I like these two who sort of like want to be desperately either dark or light, and in trying to convince the other, they come to a sort of gray place.
um, but that's the thing. They don't. Like he's Colorin's still dead set on. You know, there is no gray area. He tries to straight up wipe out the resistance, straight up kill Luke. Like he still clearly wants to be a dictator. There is no middle ground. There is no, the universe can be, diplomatic, happily ever
There
after.
is no moral middle ground, but there is middle ground in terms of the Star Wars Dark Light Jedi Sith conflict. Because his response is to just eradicate both of those things.
But even still, in regards to Ray, like after this point, say that he had actually confronted Ray again in the cave. I think since he wasn't able to turn it, he just goes back to trying to kill her again.
Well, that's the next movie's problem.
But still, like, what does this Kylo Ren do after that? If Ray does not leave his presence like immediately, doesn't he just kill her?
I'm sure he tries to, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem.
But what I'm saying is that's not these two coming to a gray area. Like Ahsoka deciding to leave the Order altogether and do what she thinks is right. That's gray area. Um,
Again, I don't think it's a gray area they come to together. I think they have different versions of they land somewhere in the middle of like the stark black and white that everything else is.
See, that I don't even agree with because even though he doesn't want the Order, quote unquote, Order to keep going and he wants to destroy it all, he's still leading it. He's still operating. He's just taken Snoke's position, but he's still operating the Order the way it was always operated. Um, and Rey, she just goes right back to being in the rebellion. Like these two characters go right back to where they were. Um,
And again, I think that's on the third movie because that's where we end it.
I'm just
And
saying that's not real gray area.
I guess. I think we're just interpreting gray area in different ways.
I love this scene. This scene was so shocking and intense.
Yeah,
Um, Kylo Ren, um, just laying waste to all these transports and blowing up Finn so he can't fight back. We can't see our best pilot in the Resistance go up against him.
or Poe, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like we can't see Poe go up against Kylo Ren, and he because he might actually have a chance against him, um, you know, in craft since he's the best pilot, but
Yeah,
that
that's something I never even thought about, which
that
is
chance
like,
is taken away from him.
yeah,
Literally blows up in his face.
that would definitely be something that I'd have wanted to pay off in the third movie if we thought about it, which is like there's that kind of tease of like Kylo Ren is such a great pilot and he's just laying waste to everything. What if Poe got the chance to confront him in the air? That would definitely have been like an action beat that I'd put in the third movie.
Yeah.
And like the thing that people like to disparagingly call Leia Poppins is coming up in a bit,
Oh, I
and
hate it too, and I don't disagree with that. Um,
I'm sorry, I have nothing but love for that sequence. I'm gonna be the one guy who like stands up for that scene until I die. I think it's perfect.
I think it's the exact opposite of perfect. It's horrendous. It is awful.
I don't
Um,
understand why. Like you've explained this to me and I
I've
still
explained it to
don't
you.
get it.
First, she should not be able to do this. Period.
Why not?
She shouldn't be able to do this. For
Why
most
not?
reasons, she should be dead the second she goes out into space. Number one. Number two, no Jedi can do this. In no Jedi can do no Jedi can do this. She's force light, force sensitive. We're gonna retcon her, actually doing legit Jedi training in the next movie. But as far as this franchise goes, the force is not just a straight up plot contrivance you can use to solve any situation. And when
I
you
mean,
blow her out into the
how
vacuum of space,
that's
she's dead.
kind of exactly what the Force is.
She can't. Okay, on that we disagree on too. But she should not be able to do that. She should straight up be dead. She should be dead. Like the force can't just will you back to life and then you out of nowhere just force pull yourself back to this ship.
See,
Like
I don't have this problem. To me, the Force has always been whatever the scene needs it to be. And the only thing that need be consistent about it is the spirituality element of it. Like Force abilities and any kind of consistency of those, I do not care. I just don't.
okay, well, I do, and this is really dumb. And
I don't
why?
care. It's great.
No, it's stupid. Why would you even do this if you're not going to just to psych the audience out? This is almost as bad as actually having rewatched that movie. Um, it's not actually, yeah, because that straight up just
I
that
don't know
shouldn't
what you're talking
this
about.
shouldn't be able to happen. But the scene with Chewie and Rise of Skywalker, it's I mean it's even more egregious than that.
Well, both of those are like payoffs, right?
No, 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 no. There's no payoff to um Chewie's death fake out. They show a
Oh, I thought you were talking about the metal.
no, 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 no. All of that's dumb too, and I hate that. But they they show another ship. Um, so they do show another ship parked off next to the one that we see Chewie get in, or the ones that they're walking him to.
That's for
So
that movie. That's for that movie.
what I'm simply saying is, um, like don't do number one, don't even do death fake outs because those are dumb and I hate those in the first place. Um, but do not contradict the rules of your universe to do them either. Like that's even worse. Um, because if no Jedi gets to do that, why does Leia?
Well, I mean, no Jedi got to do that because no writer decided that they would. That's literally the only answer.
there is
Chewie
something.
is eating the porg.
There is something. I mean, I don't have the original trilogy nostalgia, but I can kind of feel it in this scene.
Yep, especially Luke talking to R2 for the first time in forever. And like the way that R2 is going to use like what Luke here calls his cheat move, which is calling back to Leia's old message, and that's what will eventually spur Luke on into actually training Rey. And like I don't know, I think that all works. It's like this is the movie straight up coming out and telling you guys it knows what it's doing. Like it understands that the Luke Skywalker that we're all familiar with is not that guy who would give up in like the face of all this. But you know, when enough stuff happens to a person, you need to bring that back out of them. Like, what did you want Luke to show up in this movie and not have a character arc at all? He's gotta
That
he's gotta come from one place to another. He's gotta find himself again.
that and people change,
Exactly.
especially over decades.
Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, just even accepting that, I do just buy this as like I still feel like this is Luke to a degree. Like not in the sense of how he's acting, but in like obviously Hamill's performance and the way that he is not the same kind of mentor figure that Obi-Wan or Yoda was. He does feel like he's mentoring the way that I would expect Luke Skywalker to eventually turn out. And here we meet Admiral Holdo. And I don't know, just general thoughts on this character, because again, I've got a whole thing about it that people can watch. So,
Um,
how do you feel?
I don't really care for her. Like the only this is gonna sound so superficial and trite, but the only scene. Oh, there's two moments where I like Holdo. The first is when she looks over at Leia and says, "I like him," and Leia says, "Me too."
Hmm.
And then the other moment is when she does the whole kamikaze thing and kills herself by ramming through the order with the ship. That's the only two scenes I like with Holdo. Um, she strikes me as a lot of the pretentious higher ups like that I have to work for in the Navy that think they know everything and that their way is always the better way, even when it's more counterintuitive and dumb, and they think they don't have to explain anything to subordinates because they're above and they know all.
And definitely, too, this movie is definitely doing that intentionally. And to again, the speaking of trite, the subversion of expectations argument. This her characterization is definitely playing on other movie characters like that, and how ubiquitous that trope is. And in any other movie, you would be expected to hate her from the get go, find her really annoying and pretentious, and then like Poe will like get the better of her and prove that he knew he was right all along. And I like that this movie isn't quite that straightforward. And like Holdo is totally capable of making mistakes. Like everyone in this movie makes almost nothing but mistakes for the entire runtime. But I don't know. I buy what the movie is selling as far as she's just in a better headspace than Poe is. And even if she hasn't got everything figured out, she's got more figured out than he does.
I still don't even agree with that, especially because um, as me and a lot of my Navy buddies will attest to, there is really no legitimate reason for keeping your subordinates in the dark about plans and just expecting them to follow everything blindly. That's they do a whole arc in Clone Wars about that, where the clones have to listen to, like, Anakin Skywalker gets called away to go back to Coruscant, and the clones have to continue a battle on a planet with a whole new uh, general that is a lot different and sees the clones a lot more expendable, and has them doing like all these ridiculous suicide runs, and it's like we could be hitting them, um, sneak and attack style. Like we don't have to just run blindly into blaster fire. We have strategies that can save lives and take them out more efficiently. And he's just like, no, just run through them. And like this is I want to say a 4 or 5 episode arc in the Clone Wars, one of the best arcs in the whole show, and they have to um, dealing with a superior that is not right about the situation, and they have to go against orders to actually win the mission.
Right, so that would be the straightforward version of the trope. But see, like
I mean, it's not really as straightforward as I'm saying, especially since I don't want to give away like spoilers for that episode, well, for that arc of episodes. But I mean, there is more interesting nuance and stuff to go along with that. But go ahead with your point.
I was just going to say before we move on to this scene with our introduction to Rose, I do think the circumstances there are different enough that it's certainly comparable to what we're doing with Poe, but it's not exactly the same. Like, the issue isn't that anyone thinks Poe's expendable or that they're looking down on him necessarily. It's that, and whether you want to agree with the movie on this or not is a separate thing, but the movie is telling us he made a mistake and he is not owed any information, especially in a plan that, as far as anyone is concerned, he is not going to take part in. And he's just kind of operating from a place of entitlement is the wrong word. Sort of like, again, assuming that he knows what's best, and he learns that something is going on, and he just completely takes the situation into his own hands, even though the last time that happened, it got most of their fighters killed. And should he maybe just step back and think harder about this instead of jumping straight to how do I blow it up? But yeah, anyway, Rose. I don't know. I think this whole introduction is really endearing, and it was a great move to sort of like introduce her sister, Paige, at the start with that whole bombing run, and the space bombs, which people complain about endlessly, even though there's not really anything wrong with that. But whatever, we're past that. Having her go through this dialogue-free sort of thing, and that's a really compelling scene. And we focus on the necklace, and so we don't need any exposition. We just see the necklace, and we're like, oh, when the impact lands immediately. And I don't know, I think, like, shoehorned romance angle aside, the dynamic that she and Finn have is really interesting.
Do you have any more to say about that?
No, but I do briefly want to just touch on this while it's happening, this bit with Poe looking at Leia, where, for as headstrong as he is, I like this little beat of, like, he is considering for a moment, like, is this what Leia would do? Would she be okay with this? And he's really thinking about it. Yeah, I like that bit.
I do like Poe a lot in this movie.
I like everyone in this movie.
See, like we got Finn here giving them the plan, the whole rundown. Now I'm not entirely sure because I didn't rewatch it again like I was planning to. Does he volunteer himself to actually follow it through?
I don't know. I'm looking through this scene right now, and I've got the subtitles on, so I'll see what he says. I believe so. I believe. Hang on. Yeah, I'm just gonna let this play out unless you have anything else to add.
No, I don't.
Hmm. I like I do like that bit with Maz. I like that little reaction shot of like oversharing lady. Okay, yeah. So see, that's interesting. Hmm. Okay, so no, he doesn't straight up volunteer himself. I think again, we're meant to assume, like with just everything going on with him at the moment, his interest in this is we get the fleet away, and then Ray will have a safe place to come back to.
So even still, Ray is his primary motivation for doing this.
Yep.
Um, and again, um, this despite the fact that like a whole bunch of rich people are keeping those weird animal things in pens and have child laborers, none of which has anything to really do with the First Order. I mean, aside from the fact that a lot of them make their money from selling to the First Order.
Which
Um,
is not big deal.
yeah, I mean, but um, as Benicio del Toro's character says, um, they play both sides of the war, so it's not like the resistance isn't benefiting from that either. So it's somewhat hypocritical for Rose to even be mad about that. Um, on top of that, um, that's that's still
Well,
not
that's
enough.
that's that's
To,
different.
that's
That
not enough to get Finn to the place where he's willing to die for um, the cause, for the resistance. I still don't buy that we've gotten him to that place organically at all.
well, again, we'll talk about those scenes when they happen. I think the details of the Benicio del Toro discussion are more important than and like I think there's some of that you're getting wrong, but I don't know. We'll get to that.
This was a really interesting concept that we hadn't really seen in Star Wars before. This idea of force talking, like talking to people through the force from like light years away. Um, and it's something that JJ just runs with in the next movie. Um, but it was really, I remember being kind of taken aback by this. Like this was kind of a fresh thing done with the force that we hadn't seen before, um, but didn't feel wholly impractical and impossible like what we decided to do with Leia in this movie. Um, Especially since we have things like Darth Vader, you know, force choking someone that he sees on a screen,
Hmm.
and Snoke doing the same thing to one of the generals at the beginning of the movie.
And see, I believe during my first watch, I didn't even have that strong of a reaction to it. I was just like, "Oh, this is interesting." But yeah, I wasn't too. Again, I'm not really invested in like the Force abilities and like their limitations or whatever beyond what they contribute to the characterization and just like moving the story along. And so I just look at it as like, oh man, it's really interesting that we've got a means of having these two still be communicating and informing each other's story as they're like on a trajectory towards each other. And Ryan Johnson made the really smart and I think innovative choice, which was to record each of those scenes or film each of those scenes twice so that both Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver are both like just off camera from each other in each of their exchanges. So
And
they're, so they're both
based,
having that conversation twice.
based on how that's shot, that's not something you have to do since it's literally just the one actor in frame. But it just it adds an authenticity to their performance that you can see in their eyes.
Yeah. And see, like I love this. Like I love it's you feel that? That's the force, really. I love Daisy Ridley's delivery for that. Really?
That is one of the funniest bits in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't buy that like that little piece of vegetation that he hits her with even hurts. You should
I
have got
don't
like
know.
a.
It depends on how you're using that because that could happen. But like I love this. I adore all of this. And like this is the aspect of the force that I am interested in and that I care about. The degree to which it really is just this nebulous, all encompassing thing. Like, who's to say that the Force can keep you alive in space? It is literally the universe. It's the will of the universe. It exists in life, it exists in death. It has dominion over all things. And anyone who views it as a power that the Jedi have is one, viewing it too simplistically, and two, giving the Jedi too much power and authority when the Jedi are at best like an agent that the Force acts through. They are just another thing that the Force exists over and has power over.
Well, I think it's important to note that that's not necessarily. I mean, to a degree, I agree with some of that sentimentality. At the same time, um, that is certainly not the intent when we start this franchise.
Well, I mean, I don't know if George Lucas has an intent when we start this franchise, even more than I feel now
I mean,
with
even as it's evolved, like by the time we get to the prequels, we're very much not dealing with it like that.
the prequels. I don't know, because I think this movie sort of carries out the prequels like broad mission statement better than those movies got to just because of their execution. And
Yeah.
that shot was really cool. And it really is just like they reverse some footage of them pouring a bucket of water over it, Daisy Ridley's head. But yeah, I don't know. Like this movie is really the only one of these three that even tries to engage with the prequels at all thematically, and I think it maybe captures.
I really appreciate that too.
Yeah, and I
It's
think
another one of my favorite things about the movie. Um,
I
like
don't know
with Luke.
because that movie kind of suffers from what we briefly talked about in Civil War and like the Lex Luthor problem of a lot of the issue with the prequels plot wise comes from the fact that it's all one guy's master plan and almost every plot development is a machination of one person. But on some level, I do think the prequels were going for the Force is informing almost all of our characters' decisions. And like when Anakin or Obi-Wan or whoever does something that maybe doesn't make logical sense, it's just the Force kind of made them do it. And those movies don't execute it very well, but I think it's kind of the same idea that that speech is going for,
Well,
which is
it's we've
it,
lost touch with the physical side of the Force. Well, not the spiritual side of the Force, I should say.
yeah. And like I like this. I like that we just spent a little second of Ray probably experiencing rain for the first time in her life.
I really want to talk about the scene with her and Luke because we did talk over it. Um, her like dipping a toe essentially into the dark side, which is essentially what she does, freaks Luke the hell out, and he's like, you know what? I'm not training you.
Well, she does. She dips a little bit more than a toe.
Oh
Like
yeah,
if we're using a pool metaphor, she dives straight in, and that's his problem. He's like, "You just went right there. Like, I don't know if this is right. I don't know if we should be doing this."
but the weird thing is he like in this scene with her and Kylo Ren, like we keep playing with the idea of her jumping to the dark side, but um, that feels more like a she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's curious, um, versus any kind of inclination. of it being like a clear choice or it somehow being in her nature to go to the dark side. Like,
Well, I
yeah,
definitely don't think it should be an in her nature thing, and the next movie definitely doesn't.
uh, but
Uh,
my problem is like just with this movie, like we're not we're not doing enough with that idea in like
well, I don't know because this is part of the gray area thing that I'm talking about, and this is, I think, actually like now that I think about it, sort of similar to what Anakin ultimately happened, where uh, what Luke says is like it offered you something that you needed, and what he really means is wanted. But like it offered you something that you wanted, it offered you answers, and you just jumped right in. That's kind of what Palpatine plays on in the prequels, where he's like, the dark side has answers that the light side just does not. And if you join me, then you will have access to those things. And so Anakin had a little bit more information than Rey does, or had to act on. And this is a great shot, reference to Wings. It's awesome. But yeah, I do think Rey's not totally ignorant. She knows what the light side and the dark side are. She is aware that what she is going toward is the dark side, and it's offering her answers that she wants. And she's like, well, why not, honestly?
um I don't hate the Canto Bite stuff nearly as vitriolically as a lot of detractors of this movie seem to, but I do think I don't agree with you in that like I would like this more if it was I don't know, more fun. Um
I don't know. I
like,
have,
I'm even bored by the chase we eventually do. Just
yeah, I
because
don't.
I'm not really even all that invested in what's going on here. I mean, I know they have to try to find a guy that can break into yeah, they have to find a code breaker essentially. But all this stuff, like it's kind of just whatever to me. Um, in regards to Finn, I don't see how this in any way contributes to him getting to an I want to die for the resistance place, and even more so with Rose, because I don't buy that he falls in love with her over the course of these events, and I certainly don't buy the other way around either.
Hmm. Well, from Rose to Finn, I have a take on that. Again, I don't really like. I think they're cute, but I'm not invested in like.
And
Ah,
like the movie isn't asking you to be until we get to the one scene where she's like saving what we love, and then she just kisses him.
just
It
I'll.
it comes literally out of nowhere.
There's a lot of things to talk about. I'll talk about that when we get to where I feel like those parts are whatever. But insofar as Finn becoming radicalized, because that's really what we're talking about when we talk about his arc, I don't see how this doesn't contribute to that. And part of that is why I am just interested in this as a setting and why I think this is just some fun stuff. One, I just like seeing this side of the universe because, like, in these movies, we've yet to really touch on what does the upper class in this setting look like. Like, we're 8 movies in at this point, and with the exception of Coruscant, which isn't really a setting that we explore in the prequels, it's just kind of a backdrop. We've never really been anywhere that's not like lower rung used future, like, the hives of scum and villainy, like the dregs of society, pretty much. Like, Luke is a farm boy from basically nowhere. Rey is from nowhere. Han is like sort of a
A,
shady guy when we meet
a
him.
drifter.
Yeah. Obi-Wan and all the members of like that old Republic, like where they come from is gone, so we don't really get a good look at it. Leia is from the upper class, but her planet explodes before we see any of it. This is our first like extended period of time. Like, okay, what is that half of the galaxy living like? And insofar as Finn's arc goes, he needs to realize that there are more injustices than he can just run away from. And like that phrasing just occurred to me, but it's like the there is more out there that has to be dealt with than just survival, than just me and mine getting to a place that's safe from like the Gestapo pretty much. It's there are people out there who are benefiting from this system. And this movie, I think, sets up this whole franchise for what could have been a really, really interesting and a really like genuinely revolutionary final note had the last movie stuck the landing, which is Ray and Finn's arcs in particular are about how the system as it's been going on can't just keep going. Like George Lucas conceived of Star Wars in the making of the prequels as this very cyclical story. And we're talking about the prequels right now. It's like at the height of their powers, the Jedi let this terrible thing happen. They got complacent. And that began a cycle that really hasn't stopped of just bad guys show up and then we blow them up and then we don't really deal with the ideology and then more bad guys show up and we blow them up and then we just move on. And this movie is saying the cycle has to be broken. And whether that's like acknowledging that the Jedi had their problems and that they need to, if not go extinct, then at least be different going forward, or if it's acknowledging that there are like class systems that benefit from the fact that there is always a perpetual war going on throughout this galaxy, and the war just has to stop. Like, really be over. And you don't do that by just blowing things up. You do that by changing hearts and minds and changing ideologies
But
and tackling
the
ideologies.
thing is, well, there's two things with that. Is Star Wars even Star Wars without a war? And then the other question is, um, like what? Well, not even question, but I like the thematics you're speaking to, and I think that's that's pretty solid for a good stretch of this movie. My problem is that we don't do any actual changing at the end of this movie, because as I said, um, like we essentially like Kylo Ren kills Snoke, but just usurps his role. He keeps talking about tearing it down, but he doesn't tear it down. He just takes over it, and um, like the Resistance, their numbers are dwindled, but they're still exactly, their mission's still exactly the same. Like everything's still more or less the same, except Luke is gone, and we have even less freedom fighters to fight with. Now hope has been restored, and that spark in the universe has finally been lit, but everything, like structure wise, is still exactly where it was at the beginning of the movie.
Which, again, I maintain is not this movie's issue to deal with. Like, I
Okay,
think this
so you
movie
think that's a problem for the next movie to handle?
yeah, I think this movie stands on its own great, but it is, in fact, chapter 2 of 3. And if we end chapter 2 with the characters realize what needs to be done, then chapter 3 is then they do it. And that's just not the chapter 3 that we got.
Yeah, or we go on a fetch quest for a Wayfinder, and Palpatine is back for no reason, and we'll talk about that when we get there.
But yeah, no, I think, and part of that ties in also, and I think this would have been even more emphasized if we hadn't gotten rid of a couple of deleted scenes that we have with Finn. And that I brought those up on our last attempt, and I'll bring them up again when we get to them. But a focus of a lot of deleted scenes and a lot of scenes that got changed is the stormtroopers. And like what we sort of talked about last time, which is that the choice to make the stormtroopers not clones for these movies is a very deliberate choice, and they are people. And part of the ending the war, ending the cyclical system that makes it so that these movies keep happening, is acknowledging the stormtroopers as people. And like we don't like make a big emphasis in this movie on making cannon fodder out of the stormtroopers, And the Trevorrow script, or the Duel of the Fates, the version of Episode 9 that Trevorrow was going to make, did sort of follow that up, in the sense of what I was saying would have been a great, like, ultimate use for Finn in the grand story of these movies, having him be the guy that clues us all into maybe the way that we get this to finally stop is, getting the stormtroopers to down tools and getting the quote unquote cannon fodder to realize how actually important they are.
It'd be interesting to see how you pull off doing that.
Yeah. And here we have DJ, who I like a lot, and who I think services Finn's arc really well, on top of just being a really interesting character.
He is certainly one of the most unique Star Wars characters I've seen in a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, see this. I love that. And
His whole affect and tone of voice, him, or because I want to say like somewhere that's definitely talked about, but I can't remember if that was just some bizarre random thing that um Del Toro decided to just make up for the character, or if that was at all influenced from Ryan or the writers, or well, Ryan is the primary writer, but
I believe the stuttering is his idea. I'm pretty sure the stuttering is an actor choice.
I wanted to say that was the case. Yeah.
But yeah, no, and I like how he factors into the class angle of it as well, because, like, as we're gonna talk about later on, he is again our subversion of, we expect him to be the Han Solo type. We expect him to be like the rogue who, has a heart of gold underneath all that. But no, he really is just interested in money. And that's really a good use of, like, tying him into this setting, because everyone here is just interested in the money. And you can argue maybe that makes things, like, that adds too many layers in relation to Finn's arc, but
What he finally sees like another cynical aspect of the world, and like I still don't see what that has to do with the resistance. Well, is
not
it because he
that,
undermines their mission to save the resistance?
not just that, he sees a whole society of people, and he spends time with this one particular person who have, like, no allegiance to any cause. And like keeping these animals here, keeping these kids as slaves, like this whole situation that they're in, all of this stuff, this place that Rose hates so much, it develops because you have a whole bunch of people who care about something that has nothing to do with any kind of cause. They care about one thing, and that's money. And, like, Finn is coming from a far more altruistic place of, he cares about his friend, and that's a different thing, but he's not invested in morality, really. He's invested in, I care about my friend. He needs to learn to, like, care about the cause. He needs to learn to care about the larger issues at play here, or else he's being really narrow-minded like these people. On some level, he is still just kind of looking out for himself and the things that he personally cares about, and not the galaxy as a whole.
Which, I mean, yeah, it doesn't necessarily make him altruistic, but wanting to maintain your wealth versus wanting to be with a girl are two, I think, vastly different things, especially since one does not involve, enslavement or
Exactly.
imprisonment of
I'm not
animals.
saying that they're comparable in any way beyond, how do you get like this? You get like this by not caring about the bigger picture. And I don't know. I think this chase is fun, and I enjoy, like, how much Rose is, like, having a ball, like, destroying all of this stuff. Eat the rich.
I enjoy the cynicism um, of his uh, his betrayal, Benicio del Toro's character DJ.
Mm,
Um, but see, that's I don't know. Like, okay, so this guy who doesn't care about anyone but himself, he betrayed us. The Resistance, they're all about protecting each other in the universe. Um, I want to die for that now because I've seen what the other side looks like, and it's not good to be a part of that side. Like, is that the arc? Is that what you're telling me the arc is? Is that so because DJ betrays him, he's now ready to die for the Resistance?
that's a simplification, but in the broad strokes, yeah. Finn sees like dozens, if not hundreds, of people die because of this guy whose stuff that he was like what DJ is selling. Finn, you get the sense is maybe buying for a second when they're having that discussion, and he's like, "I could have been like this guy if I just didn't think about anything but what I personally cared about and what matters to me as an individual." Like by not caring about what's best for the galaxy as a whole, and like by not committing myself to any kind of moral cause, a bunch of people are going to die. And like he sees them and like hears them like get blown out of the sky. And like another person he cares about, Poe, is on one of those ships. I don't see how that's not enough for him to go, okay, maybe I need to start caring about things.
Care maybe die for. I mean, you're winning me over on it, but I still don't. I don't know if I buy. I'm ready to die for the cause. I do not know if I buy that.
Maybe.
That is that is the epitome of not necessarily zero, but a really no number to 100
Mm.
over the course of
I
what?
mean,
Not even a day, maybe 2 days.
keep in mind, there are people who watch this movie and will insist that Finn doesn't even have an arc. So, like, if he doesn't end in a place that's pretty extreme away from where he started, then you're going to have even more people saying, well, he just didn't have a character journey across this movie at all. Like, I get the feeling that this is just a case of where something that is not like too overblown for you is not subtle enough for or is too subtle even for a lot of other people.
I do see where you're coming from there.
Yeah. That's another line delivery I like. I'd rather not do this now. Yeah, me too. And I think this whole conversation is really interesting. Like, why did you hate him? I didn't hate him. Well, then why did you kill him? And it's like, because he was tying me down. Like, it's because I didn't hate him that I needed to get rid of him. I can't have that if I'm going to grow into what I need to grow into. And like people will look at this scene and still to this day act like kill the past is what this movie is claiming as its own central ethos. And like a lot of that is like, oh, you see a movie that uses subversion of expectations as a story device a lot, and you have a character come out and say, kill the past. Like that makes sense as a thing that you would say in a story that's
But
full
it's so
of.
weird that people were acting like Ryan Johnson was like looking like at the monitor and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna screw up your childhood, and you're gonna like it." Like it was so bizarre that fans took that so personally. But
Yeah,
the
and part of it undoubtedly is packaging it with this Luke stuff. Of like the same people who have that problem are the same people who are like, I can't believe Luke would do something like that. You've killed my childhood. You've ruined my character. But kill the past is not what this movie is saying. Like Kylo Ren is just wrong. This movie has a way more nuanced take on it, and it is very much about revering the elements of the past that you should and that you can learn and grow from. But yes, to some degree, the elements of the past that are just holding you back, you do kind of have to cut yourself loose from those.
Yeah, and again, like I don't think I agree with you there. Like the movie definitely isn't saying kill the past, especially since we still more or less end up in a very similar place to where we started by the end of this film, where the order's still the order, the resistance is still the resistance, Rey's still on the light side, Kylo Ren's still dark. Like we still have our classic archetypes. Um, we didn't do some drastic, mind-blowing, um, genre-defining shift with this franchise. Like um, people act like this movie was um, trying to be so like revolutionary by we've been doing the whole so quote unquote subvert expectations thing. There's a fair amount of that, but I don't think it's the movie trying so hard to be something you're not expecting.
Yeah. What this movie is trying to do is it's trying to use the framework of what you're familiar with from Star Wars to then tell an interesting story. And part of doing that is just we can't do the same thing a second time. That's not interesting. And like
Yeah,
people,
but it's not as simple as they lose. I mean, they kind of lose by the end, but it's not as simple as the Resistance and Rey lose again, just like the Resistance and Luke did in Empire Strikes Back.
I really like how esoteric this stuff is. Like this is just weird. And I forget, like one of the podcasts that I listened to after this movie came out, like one of the big reasons they love this movie is just Star Wars is weird again. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that this movie feels it definitely feels less mainstream than Force Awakens and even the prequels did.
And
But
that I do appreciate about it, yeah.
yeah, like you
Like
can read as
I
much as you
remember
want to. And
watching the scene for the first time on my ship, not knowing what the hell I was looking at. Um, but upon multiple reviewings, it's so clear. Like she wants to see her parents. That's what those two shadows are, and the shadow gets closer, it forms into one, and it's literally just her.
yeah, and like that's why I'm so mad about what we eventually do in Rise of Skywalker because part of her wanting her parents and part of her, in Kylo's words, like looking for them everywhere is if she has a family, then she has some sense of belonging and some sense of inherent significance. And
But
if,
this movie does not give her that, and
yeah,
that I think that is the strongest thing in the movie.
mm-hmm.
Um, aside from getting rid of Snoke, and
If she like straight up finds like a cosmic thing and asks, tell me where I come from, tell me what my meaning is, and it's like, it's just you. You just gotta work it out for yourself. That's great. And like in this scene, she kind of doesn't quite know how to process it. And she's like turning toward Kylo as like someone who can at least point her in a direction. And then he's the one who eventually like tears it down for her. Like I really like the way that this all plays out. As like she came here to bring Luke to the Resistance, but she also wants answers from Luke, and she's not getting that. And Kylo is maybe offering her something. And so it's a really natural reason in her character for why she would sort of be like, maybe there's something here that we can make work.
it's interesting how well the chemistry and sexual tension works here when it really wasn't hinted at that much in Force Awakens, almost at all.
Yeah, like if it's anywhere in Force Awakens, it's in that scene where she's strapped to the chair.
Yeah,
But this is like the first time that they're really like talking to each other and like viewing each other as people. And it's not just like you are my adversary, it's you have something that I like deep down in my soul like want. So many people complained about this. It's like,
um,
oh,
what that she beats Luke, or that
she quote unquote beats Luke, even though she beat him by technically cheating pretty much. Like
did
he
she?
disarms her. She
I
grabs
love that moment, by the way.
you like what?
That she forces him to use the Force. That's the first time he uses the Force in this whole movie.
Yep.
Like throughout that whole time he's teaching her, he's not in the Force himself. She even says like you've cut yourself off from it. He's still maintaining to have himself cut off. Rey has to literally force him to use it.
Mm. And technically, the first time is when he connects with Leia, which also would have tied into that being the bit where they're both mourning Han, I believe. Oh no, no, yeah, no, that's a different thing. But like he connects with Leia, and she's like Luke, and they both realize that they're there. But yeah, that's a great point of like he had to have cut himself off from the Force, otherwise, like how would he not have known that Han died? How would he not have known that all of these terrible things were happening? The only reason is like he just cut himself off completely. And I guess the big issue for people is whether you just think this is too far.
Like
Like,
that he would try to make this attempt on Kylo Ren. See, and that's the other thing I wanted to ask you because I think it's interesting. The movie doesn't tell you which one is actually the truth or not, because it can only be one of the two, right? It can't be that he just ignited it and didn't go for the swing, or that he actually did go for the swing, like Kylo says. It
yeah,
has to be one of those two. Um, do you think there's some unreliable narrator? I
I
mean,
think
I assume we're meant to believe Luke.
I
Um,
implicitly trust Luke,
yeah,
but I do think it's meant to be left to interpretation. And I think the people who like really hate this choice are the same people who like look at it the way ironically that Kylo looks at it. Like the people who think that this is like character assassination for Luke are the people who in their mind think that he went for the swing. I don't think he did.
I don't think he did either. Um, and even then, I don't think he's a completely like unflawed, non-fallible character that can't make a mistake. Like
Yeah, no. And like
half the reason, half the reason that Empire Strikes Back is a successful film is because he keeps making mistake after mistake in that movie.
yeah. And like again, this is where I think this strikes like such a perfect balance of he is a different Luke from the guy that we know, but also that is totally in character for Luke Skywalker. Of like, this is the guy who, after knowing that Vader was his father and going there, like attempting to redeem him in Return of the Jedi, like something sets him off, and he just goes ham on Vader. Like this guy who his plan was to turn him initially in that movie, he's just like, I'm just gonna take you out because you pissed me off. Luke Skywalker is not a guy who does not have like poor impulse control. Like he is an optimistic and in a lot of ways mellow kind of guy, but I totally buy that after all that he's gone through and like all that he's done to gain some semblance of peace, and he looks into the mind of his nephew and he sees, in his own words, death and the destruction of everything I love. Yes, of course, the guy from the original trilogy would think about stopping that. Of course, he'd turn on his lightsaber. I totally buy that Luke Skywalker would do that. I
I
also buy
think
that
the
he would.
Force Ghost thing is just the most ridiculous thing.
Wait, the what is?
The Force Ghost thing.
What, this Force Ghost thing?
Well, yeah, but like, okay, so back in A New Hope, right?
Mhm.
When Obi-Wan is fighting Vader, and he says, um, you're gonna regret killing me, Vader. If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Oh,
I'm
you're
like,
talking about the lightning.
yeah, I'm like, how does that even?
Don't care.
Okay, well, wait though. Watching that scene, I'm like, okay, so if you die and you become that powerful anyway, why are you even? Okay, whatever, fine. We're not even gonna talk about that. But So to finally see what they can do after they're already dead, it's like, okay, why does any Jedi fear death like whatsoever at all if they can do stuff like this? And why are they not still actively involved in fighting people who are on the dark side if they can just call down lightning anytime they want?
Well, my response to that is one, maybe Yoda's a special case. Two, maybe this island is a special case because this is like an ancient Jedi place. You know, the spirituality of it. Maybe being here allows Jedi or Force ghosts or whatever, modicum more power, whatever. And three, I imagine, especially for someone like Yoda, that's like, even if I'm not quote unquote dead, like my role in the galaxy's events is over. Like I'm still here, but like non-interference basically. So any of those three things, I guess.
I don't know. I would call like blowing up all those Jedi scrolls interference.
But they're not in there, and Yoda knows that they're not in there.
Okay, yeah, fine. Okay, so he knows what the audience and Luke do not know. But at the same time, it's like if you're going to physically manipulate anything in the real world at all, is that non-interference?
It's interference insofar as he did that because Luke needed like the wake-up call. And so like he's pushing Luke to basically act not on his behalf, but to really, get his head
Yeah,
back.
he's nudging Luke in a direction.
Yeah. And like the Force Ghost did that before, obviously. So that's not too much. And like I feel bad that we didn't talk about that scene for the bulk of it because that's maybe my favorite scene in this movie.
Oh, that
I,
whole exchange?
yeah. Like Yoda and Luke was perfect, perfect, perfect. Not a single problem with it. And I was so happy to see Puppet Yoda again.
No, I just think that's funny. And I don't think it's inconsistent because like I said, like that's set up as far as A New Hope. But I just find that hilarious that they can do stuff like that while they're dead.
But yeah, see, I love all of this. I love, and like part of this is just at some point after 8 movies, you would want a franchise that's all about wars with wars in the title to start getting a little bit more class conscious, but also just, I like this for Finn's arc. It's all machine. Like, live free, don't join. Worry about you and yours because the cycle will never end. Why bother doing anything? Why bother caring about a cause if the war just isn't going to stop? Like, you've got the right idea, Finn. Just worry about you and Ray, who you personally care about a lot, and like get the heck out of Dodge and no one will blame you. And he's like internalizing that. Like he's almost buying what DJ's selling him. I don't know why, but I really like that line delivery of like, can it, lady? So yeah, this is where I think Poe gets a little more out of line. But like, sure, if you see this and like you make what I suppose would be the natural assumption, you would like think poorly of Holdo. And again, whether or not he's entitled to an explanation, you could argue, is it just more practical for her to let him know what's going on, even though who knows who's listening in or whatever. But like throwing a tantrum over it, I think like at that point, like she should like put him in a brig somewhere and she's just like get him off the bridge. Like she's being very lenient to him in this instance.
I don't agree with that because he's at a point now where because she's kept him in the dark, um, it looks like she is like needlessly just giving up and endangering all of those lives. He's like, we don't like those transports are unarmed, unshielded. Um, like it looks like she's sending them all out. Like, we might live, or there's the very possible chance that that's a suicide act and we all die. So at this point, he's worried for the lives of all, like his life, the lives of his compatriots, of the rebellion. Like you need to like explain to him what the heck is going on. There is no good reason for keeping him.
Well, here's the thing. He
It
doesn't
would
need
be like if I was on my ship and the CO said, in like while we're in shark infested waters, um, jump off the side of the boat and try your best to get into one of our capsules that turn into like one of those floaty things that you have to use if you have to abandon ship. It would be like that.
I suppose. Which I mean, one, Poe is no stranger to moves that risky, as we've established, and two, I don't think she has to tell him. I think it just matters that somebody other than her knows, which is maybe where the movie is just deliberately not giving us as much information as it could, because who knows who else in that bridge does know what her plan is? And who's to say that Poe isn't an exception for being in the dark?
Because no one else bothers to even say anything, and it's like I don't know, like because we're pretending like no one else is in that scene since no one has anything else to say. It's I don't know. I have a tough time with that.
Eh, like blip blippity bloop.
Uh, I can't wait for us to finally get to one of my favorite moments in the movie.
Which one is that?
That would be when DJ looks over to Finn, and Finn's like, "You're wrong," and he's like,
Maybe.
"Maybe," and then he just walks away.
And that line was also a choice by Del Toro. Ryan Johnson mentions that he had like a whole other, like a more elaborate sort of line, and Del Toro was just like, "No, what if I just have him say maybe?"
And
He's
he's
like,
like, "That's so much better than all the convoluted stuff I was coming up with to
"Yeah,
have him say." Yeah, I
yep."
remember that from the commentary.
So yeah, it's around here. I don't know if it's right here, but it's around here where we get one of the deleted scenes, which is yeah, I believe it's here. Like this whole, it's like a 5 minute sort of sequence of them walking through this hallway, almost getting spotted, and then they wind up in this elevator where they're surrounded by stormtroopers, and one of them recognizes Finn and is like, FN 2187? Is like, oh hey, I knew it was you. And like Finn isn't sure like if he's gonna rat him out, and he has his hand on his blaster and he's like, don't make me do this. And then it turns out he's just there like, you got promoted because of the outfit, and he's like, look at you moving up in the world, like, woo. And it's this great humanizing moment. And it's like these guys are more than just cannon fodder. They are human beings.
That would have been really nice to have in a franchise where, since we want to get away from the prequels, and we're using like human antagonists, we don't bother humanizing them at all.
Yeah.
Finn
And
is
like
the token.
and establishing that Finn has a connection with them, like a pre-existing connection. It wasn't all just like he looked badly at Phasma as like an authority figure. He had peers. He had people who he interacted with and probably had good relationships with here. And like if Finn can be made to turn, why not anyone else?
I think people also complain about um, Snoke in terms of his look. I think he actually looks great. The CGI on him is stellar as always. You got Andy Serkis delivering a great performance. I mean, after his work with Caesar, Gollum, like the guy can do no wrong. He's insanely good and expressive, and that
Yeah.
always translates well to whatever character he's inhabiting. Um, I I don't want to say too much before we get to the actual death scene. Um, but how do you feel about Snoke engineering them even having a forced connection in the first place. Rey
I
and
really
Kylo.
like it because again, that's part of him trying to be Palpatine. All of this is in service of him getting Kylo to where he wants Kylo to be, where he's like, "You killed Han Solo. It didn't really work out the way you wanted it to. You're still conflicted. I can see all of this, like, you're still being pulled toward the light. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna indulge in this sort of connection that you have with Rey, and I'm going to use her as my pawn, basically, to where you bring her here and you kill her, and that will be that will be like your proof to me that you are like on board." And I really like that, and it doesn't work out the way that he wanted it to.
Uh, no, but the major issue with that death is that again, that's also really dumb. You know the whole thing,
Uh,
right? Why it doesn't really work.
Elaborate.
Okay, so um, Snoke talks about how he can see Ren's mind, can see his intent, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, him turning the lightsaber, like I don't buy that he can trick Snoke into thinking, oh, he's actually going to kill Rey when he has every intent of killing him. Like,
Well, all he has to do is think in broad strokes, like turn my lightsaber toward my true enemy and strike them down. And like if I was Snoke, I wouldn't be thinking that he was turning the lightsaber, which he was not holding.
but the fact that he doesn't, I don't know. It's like every explanation I've seen for that is is the one I just gave, where it's like he can see his intent, but can't see so specifically that he doesn't know that he's the one that Kylo means to kill. Like it's just
Well, who's to say how specific it is or isn't, or how specific intent reading powers are? I don't know.
I mean, you explained it better than I've ever heard anyone explain it, which is pretty impressive.
I think that I don't even think I said anything special. I think that's just what's in the scene. Also, we talked over Laura Dern making her own pew sound effects, which is adorable.
That's a funny little moment. I like that exchange.
And I also like the bit that we talked over with DJ giving back the necklace.
But I
That
also really don't like that Holdo's plan um, is also just as, I mean, arguably even more poorly thought out than than
pose.
yeah, Pose, because she has no real plan for how to engage um, the order if they do in fact spot these craft, even though they're not on the scanners. Um, like the ship that she's on has no real weapon capabilities. She just comes up with light speeding through the ships just on a whim after seeing like a dozen or so ships get blown up. So it's
Well,
like
well, without DJ ratting them out, we have no reason to believe they would be spotted. So maybe she's just right to be that confident.
you know what, that's true, and that I'll give you. It's just see that lack of communication thing is. I mean, I'm not on her character's side, but I do like that. I mean, that is in fact the catalyst for why all of that happens in the first place. If Poe does not enact that mission with Rose and Finn, then the aircraft are not spotted.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Yeah. And yeah,
I also like how vindictive and playful
yeah,
Snoke is. Like we didn't even see. I mean, Vader will do the occasional force choke, um, But even Palpatine didn't just toy around with people like this with the Force.
Yeah, Palpatine had like a sense of humor, and he was
He
a
was
guy who
super
was really,
hammy and goofy, and I could barely even take that character seriously in any film, really.
yeah.
Um,
But like when
but
Palpatine had like glimpses of what we're seeing here, which is just he enjoys toying with her. Like he's like a cat that's caught a mouse or a bug. And it's just like I'll let you die eventually, but first I'm just gonna mess around for a bit. And like I just want to briefly speak to what you talked about, which was I think to the degree that he is in this movie, Snoke is a really memorable, interesting presence just because of the performance, and it's really well done. And like if your issue, I've not heard this complaint, but if your issue with with Snoke is just that you wanted to see more of that performance, then I understand that completely.
um, no, I mean Andy Serkis is good in everything he's in, but I don't need more Snoke because
Yeah,
Snoke is just Palpatine again.
yeah,
Um,
me neither. I'm just saying, if anyone were to say that, that I could get behind. But people who are just like, "Oh, why did you toss Snoke under the bus
yeah,
for?"
you tossed out Snoke without delving into his interesting backstory and
He's just Palpatine
fleshing
again.
him
You
out.
guys, come on.
And it's like, no, guys, this guy's just a Palpatine stand-in, and there's nothing special about Palpatine as a villain. Like he's no Thanos, he's no Joker, he's
And that's again what will become the big problem of the next movie, which is retroactively making this entire saga centered around Palpatine, who is really just a plot device.
yeah, he's more of a hammy. Well, he's not even really hammy in the original trilogy so much as the prequels, but he's just a hammy bad guy. He is like when I think of carbon copy generic bad guys, like I think of Palpatine.
Yeah,
He's bad and evil because we don't even know his motivations.
he
Like
spends
one,
most of his time sitting in a chair.
yeah, that's one of the most really annoying things about this franchise as a whole is we don't even know their the end game of the Empire or really even the Order. Like, do they just want to rule everything generically, just rule the universe, or
Pretty much, yeah.
yeah, that's pretty bland. And if Kylo Ren wants to create something different, what exactly is that? You keep saying tear it down. What are you going to put in its place that would be at that would be any way more fascinating than what you have? And what you have is pretty bare bones, generic, good versus evil stuff with Star Wars. That's the bread and butter. But it's like if you're going to change that, what would that even be?
And I'd have liked to have seen how the third movie tackled that. That makes me think of the fact that we haven't talked about Hux at all. And what I think this movie is doing with Hux is really interesting, and people who complained about it wouldn't have complained about it had Rise of Skywalker done something different, which
Yeah,
is
Hux is the Starscream of this trilogy, and I like that a lot.
yeah. And I like this movie and like making him the butt of the joke and like having everyone else underestimate him and tear them like throw him around, even though he's really the only one of the bad guys who's talking any sense. Like when we get to it, he's going to keep like making the actual smart strategic suggestions, whereas Kylo Ren is just obsessed with his personal vengeance. And I'd have loved to have seen that carried into the continuation, where after a movie of being dismissed and like trampled on for so long, I would have liked the dynamic for the third movie to be Kylo Ren doesn't know what he's doing. He just wants to tear things down. He has no plan for what to build after. He's just anger and like directionless emotion and spite. And Hux is the guy who actually has a plan and is like, no, the First Order should be doing this. Like, our end game is this. Hux should be the guy with the end game, and he should be like taking the next movie as an opportunity to be the Starscream, to be the guy who's like plotting behind Kylo's back and trying to usurp that power. That, I think, is the natural dynamic coming off of this movie.
What's unfortunate is, see, that's the thing. If this movie wasn't received the way it was, and most people actually enjoyed it, I don't know if Disney would have even felt the need to go so retro. What's the? I keep
Retro, no. Man, now I'm lost again. But to that point, is that Disney or is that specifically Abrams? Because
Well, I feel like that's anyone they would have put in the driver's seat for the next movie if it's not Ryan Johnson again.
That's not what Tomorrow had in mind.
Because Abrams is diehard Star Wars fan who does not know how to do anything else aside from just
Start.
retread. He's a retread guy. He is, let's just keep paying homage to what came before and essentially do the same thing over and over.
But like to that
is the one that actually wanted to take some risks, try some slightly different stuff, and go a different direction than what people have become accustomed to with this series.
Well, what Trevorrow was going to do isn't exactly what I'm talking about, but it has shades of that. So I don't think it's necessarily true that anyone other than Ryan would have done what JJ did with it. I think Disney doesn't care either way. Like the higher ups, I don't think they care what the story of any of these movies is. I think once they bring JJ on and he decides he has to end it, he has all of those ideas about just like backtracking, and that's where the big mistake is.
Yeah, which again, I don't even know if he necessarily would have done had this movie not been received the way it was. Like it was so weird watching this for the first time, really enjoying it despite hating a lot of what we do with Rose and Finn, and like getting back to civilization after being gone for like a week and a half, and the whole internet was screaming at me, telling me I should hate it.
Ugh. Yeah, that's
so bizarre because I didn't like, I wasn't, on shore, like I didn't have access to the internet, so I didn't see the immediate vitriol and divisiveness that came when this movie first hit. I had a solid week and a half of just letting it simmer, and then I get to the internet and it's, this movie sucks, it ruined Star Wars, blah.
I love that. I love how gruesome it is. That guy falling and exploding. But I'm just gonna say I couldn't imagine not loving this fight scene. Couldn't be me.
And when I eventually do my Star Wars trivia video, this scene will most certainly be in there.
Yeah. Like, this is my favorite fight just in the franchise, personally.
I've seen better in Clone Wars, but that's not fair because those are animated characters and they can do...
Yeah, true. I should specify when I say franchise, I mean the 9 movies.
9 movies? Yeah, I would have to say this is a super exciting scene. Part of me wants to say I like the Revenge of the Sith fight with Obi-Wan and Anakin just slightly more.
I'm in the camp that thinks that one is like a bit too long and over choreographed. This one I don't think overstays its welcome. All of
there's more tension here, yeah, for sure.
And like the choreography,
but they're actually meeting up some opposition. It doesn't feel like straight up 50-50 fight. Like it feels, because a lot, and this is Rey's first like real Jedi duel since she fought Kylo in the first movie.
Yeah, and like that
fight, super experienced Jedi.
Yeah, like we mentioned with that fight, it doesn't feel like a dance, even though all choreographed fighting is technically a dance. Like you could argue that the fight, the problem with the lightsaber duels in the prequels is that they were too showy, and it felt too much like people who were supposed to be fighting each other were working in tandem to make it look nice. This looks like people fighting to survive. And like
Still
I
holding on. Let go. Even though I can't do that myself.
exactly, that's his whole issue. It's like he thinks he's quote unquote moving on by just like burning everything down to the ground, but the fact that he feels the need to do that means that he is not moving on at all.
And we talked over the scene where he chose not to kill Leia, or at the very least was hesitating.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Who knows whether or not? Well, he did move his hand away from the button,
yeah,
but
he fully stopped. Like he was not going to kill Leia.
mm,
And I think that's really interesting because he kills his father. Could you? I mean, I feel like if he forced himself to kill his mother in this movie, um, he couldn't even keep spewing all this vitriol to Rey. He'd just be in utter turmoil.
yeah, that would really screw him up. And like, just as we're building to it, I like that even though the action scene is over, the tension of that sequence is not over at all, and like it really is still just mounting. And I like that
Yeah, the real ending of that sequence is the lightsaber snapping in half.
yeah, and I love the choice to have that and the light speed ram and Finn and Rose about to be executed all culminate like in the same instant.
Talk about a climax.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is upon every single watch of this movie. This is the big moment where I'm like, it would have been nice if we could have gotten one of them to actually switch to turn.
I don't know. I just don't have it. Because like I don't see it for this movie and for like either of these characters
I
in there.
don't either, but I feel like the movie was teasing me with that movie for the majority of the runtime once we started playing with um, Ray going to dark side, and
Tease,
if I go to Kylo Ren, he will turn. Like
tease, I think is probably the perfect word because yeah, they were teasing you with the idea in the sense that they put the idea in your head and oh, wouldn't that be interesting? But for the trajectory that Rey and Kylo have been on through this movie, if Kylo turned to the dark side, or I mean, if Kylo turned to the light side, or Rey turned to the dark side, I think that would feel forced, and it would not feel like what the rest of this movie was actually building to.
yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest complaint about that I can lob with this movie is, I mean, I gotta admit, it's f- like there are parts of this, large parts of this movie that are pretty enjoyable, but with that, it made me wish for a different movie. It made me wish for the movie where I got that.
I guess that is the major thing is, and this is not the only movie to have this by a long shot. Anyone could have this with any movie, but it's does this movie, whether intentionally or otherwise, propose ideas for other movies that you would prefer to watch than what is actually going on?
Because like as it stands, I remain ever conflicted about this movie. It's it's enjoyable in a way that none of the prequels are, but I have a lot of issues with it. I don't like. Um, I'm not a huge fan of Finn's arc. Hate Rose. Um, I mean, in this moment, I don't hate Rose, but I feel pretty ambivalent about Rose. Like up to this scene, I hate her by the end of the movie. Um, I I really wish we humanized the not. I keep wanting to call them clones just because I'm so like
And this
intrigued by
is
Clone
another
Wars.
part of that. This is another scene that got changed where the original intent was Finn confronts Phasma, and there are a bunch of stormtroopers around them, and he's like, "Why don't you tell them what you did, Phasma? When I put a gun to your head, you gladly sold out Starkiller Base." And like the stormtroopers turn towards her, and you get the sense of like, are they going to like confront her or like shoot her for being a traitor? And she just like rapid fire takes out all of them, and like Finn uses that as an opportunity to take her out. And that's like just the two real like important bits of the humanizing the stormtroopers are unfortunately what got left on the cutting room floor.
That would
And
have been far more interesting than this.
I don't have a problem with this, but yeah, this is very
Real,
it's very
real.
straightforward.
It's straightforward, paint by numbers, generic, and I guess I'd feel less like, I don't know. Angry's the wrong word. Slightly frustrated, I guess. I'd feel less frustrated about it if they didn't make a big deal out of Phasma and Force Awakens, and then we do nothing with her there, and we do nothing with her in this movie.
Hmm.
It's just a whole bunch of nothing, and he's like rebel scum, and I'm like, okay, you've won me on that slightly. Like I buy that he will decide to join the cause, maybe you've won me over to that extent. I don't buy that he's willing to kill himself kamikaze style at the end of this movie, but that works. I just wish that there was, I don't know, a hint at more of a history than we got to see between him and Phasma. There was some of that where he's like, "I'm in charge now, Phasma," but that's goofy. That's played for a joke, and I'm talking about more like character stuff. Um, it would have been nice to get more of that. I love this bit that he pulls
Yep.
out his gun while Kylo was down, then he immediately takes his hand off the gun.
And see, that's another thing where like that says a lot about Hux, where he's actually a clever and smart guy. Where if he wanted to usurp his power in that moment, he could have, and it was a smart move of him to like to go back on it once Kylo wakes up. Because once he's awake, who's to say that
He
he's fast
freezes with
enough?
his hand and then kills Hux.
Yeah, like he's seen like we know that Kylo can stop a blaster bolt with his mind. So Hux is a really interesting character in that if he sees an opportunity, he will take it. If that opportunity goes away, then he'll play the long game and he will allow himself to play second fiddle until another opportunity presents itself. And I just wish that we'd paid that off in the next movie.
Instead of introducing another general for no reason and then killing him too.
So dumb.
Yeah, it's pretty stupid. Um, the ice creatures are interesting. I always enjoy when we add little like weird aliens.
Yeah, and again, like they're not a design that I would think of as a Star Wars alien.
Well, I don't even know necessarily what a Star Wars alien would look like in relation to another alien. I
Well, like
appreciate
I'm
that
thinking like,
all kinds of weird creatures exist in this franchise, and they could look like anything.
but like when you think of like Star Wars creatures, it's like people in costumes.
It could be something that someone could like wear as a costume.
Yeah, like even in the prequels where everything's CG, we make everything relatively human size and shape, like little tiny foxes made out of ice is not something I would have thought of as a Star Wars creature. Or
Um,
crystals, I guess.
I do like this striking imagery of the salt, but being like red dust under it. So, and they have to
Yeah.
use weird kind of janky aircraft that pulls the dust up, so it leaves like the red trail. I think that's really cool.
Mm.
I always enjoy adding visual flourishes to sequences like that because it makes them pop more.
And I loved it. As soon as Poe mentions, I hope that door holds, they've got a thing to break the door. It's like he asked for that to happen, basically.
It's like Thor in Avengers: Age of Ultron. Is that the best you can do? It's
Yeah.
like I had to ask.
And that was another thing that I meant to mention, like way back toward the beginning, that slipped my mind. It's interesting how many people reacted so badly to Luke's arc in this movie when it's really not far off from Thor and Endgame, and even more so, Peter in Into the Spider-Verse. Those are two very similar
Um,
character arcs to what we do with Luke, and people loved those and hated this.
well, Thor purists hate what was done with Thor in Endgame. Um, as well as, I mean, there are a number of people like the Thor thing is actually way more divisive than you think it is. I promise
I
you.
know it is divisive, but generally, it's not nearly as divisive as Luke in this movie. Not nearly. The line that birthed 1,000 memes. So many reactions to this movie can be summed up with salt. I also like these designs for the ships. These speeders are interesting. I like that the cockpit is off to the side and not in the center.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice. They're like bumper cars or bumper speeders.
Yeah, like the sidecar of a motorcycle. And I love it. What the hell? And like part of we mentioned in Force Awakens how it's a real problem that we don't know how the good guys got to be playing the defensive again after they won last time. Like how is the First Order so dominant, but at the same time, in the moment, it just like you understand as a storyteller why you would make that choice because it adds so much tension and like throughout this whole sequence, every time it looks like they've got a little bit of an edge. Nope, something else goes wrong. And it really adds to like your investment and just like, can something go right for once?
It's interesting because um, a lot of Star Wars stuff, it's destroy this, destroy that. The like the resistance is so whittled down at this point that their mission for this movie is just survive.
Yeah. And like again, in much the same way that Force Awakens had a quote unquote happy ending, but we end that movie with kind of a little bit of an emotional like, yeah, we won, but did we really win? Like, are we really in a celebratory mood? This movie also ends with, all right, we won insofar as,
We're still alive.
yeah. And like,
Still in the
actually,
fight. Hope isn't lost. Hope is actually reignited. And
yeah. And it's really interesting how,
we talked over Ray's really dumb line that should have been got cut.
yeah, that just, yeah, that take that out. Just take it out. Shouldn't be like, I get it. Like, the other characters are allowed to celebrate. That's fine. But her, she should, like, we should cut to her in there and she should be silent.
Yeah, like she after she just had that whole interaction with Kylo Ren to woo, I like this.
Like, that can't be the next thing that we see.
Yeah, that's bad.
And, but, like, I do like how it's similar, but actually almost opposite to the ending of The Force Awakens, where in The Force Awakens, the big victory is the resistance got one over on the First Order, and we get to celebrate that. And the loss is like a personal character loss of like one of the original trilogy characters that we love. Here, it's almost exactly the opposite, where in terms of the conflict with the First Order, they pretty much lose. Like they've lost 90% of their guys and they get out alive, but just barely. And the victory is a personal character victory for an original trilogy character where hope got reignited and Luke got to rediscover himself.
I hate the porgs, and I don't. We haven't talked about the porgs at all. I just realized.
I
And
haven't talked about it because I'm completely ambivalent toward them.
I do not buy the excuse that we're given as to why they're in this movie. Um, like I think they're just here to be, the cute product we can sell to toys, like Baby Yoda has become now. Um, and like the excuse that we're given is there were too many ducks or some kind of
Muffins.
um, wildlife or on the island that Luke is on that they couldn't cut out, so they just CGI'd porgs over them. So why do you keep giving us these cutesy, unnecessary scenes with the porgs in the cockpit with Chewie? Like we don't need that.
I imagine the puffin thing happens first, and then some executive is like, oh, we could make toys out of these things, put them in more scenes.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the latter.
And like I don't know, I don't mind them. Like I literally like it never occurs to me to like even register the porgs almost. Like
Well,
people are either like
only
they're
in scenes where we have to um, like do a gag with them, like Chewie deciding not to eat one because a whole bunch of others are staring at him,
he should have.
or
I would have been perfectly fine with that scene if he ate it anyway. Let him
yeah,
eat
so would
it
I.
anyway.
But because they wuss out and he doesn't eat it, I don't like that scene. I
Yeah.
also don't like all the other scenes of them like whining and making noise and Chewie like swatting them away off the controls. Like that's really obnoxious and unnecessary. We don't need that. And
I just like it barely registers for me that they're in this movie.
I just don't buy any of this. I don't buy that like he went from I only care about Ray to I'm now ready to die for the resistance or through the course of the rest of this movie. I buy that he decides he wants to join and be a part of the fight. Um, but die instead of having a shot at being with Ray, I don't buy that at
You
all.
know what I particularly buy, or like what I think helps it for me at least, isn't just that like it's the quote unquote altruistic thing to do. He specifically says, I won't let them win. And there is that element of he's got a chip on his shoulder about it, and partially he's doing it out of spite.
But even worse than that is this. All of this ridiculous platitude that she spits out that is not even applicable to the situation at all. And
The problem is that it's not applicable to the situation. In a vacuum, I don't think it's a bad line. The problem is it doesn't make sense here.
it just yeah. So it's a bad line. Um, and I don't buy that she fell in love with Finn over the course of these events.
I don't buy that she fell in love with him. Like, I don't know. I'm not even going to say that much. Again, I don't really feel too much one ways or the other about
I think that kiss comes out of nowhere.
big
They
grand.
have little to no chemistry in that way, and I think that all of that belonged in another movie.
Hmm. What I did like was the earlier scene where like without having to say anything, we established that she's come around on him to where we open this movie and she's got this very idealized vision of him as like this hero, and then that's quickly disillusioned and she starts getting really bitter. And then we have the bit where Poe has almost given up hope, and Finn is like, no, we have a chance. People believe in Leia, people believe in the cause. If we ask for help, then they'll come. And like you can see on Rose's face, she's like, there's the guy I thought you were to begin with. Like you're finally there. This is
I like all the hints that were given that Luke isn't actually here. We don't hear any footsteps. He doesn't leave
any
any
footprints.
footprints in the salt.
He's looking much more well trimmed than he was.
Yeah. He's the Matrix version of himself.
Hmm. And see, this is also why I think the next movie really like just makes a big mistake by giving Kylo the straightforward redemption arc, which is that even here we have his mom saying, "I know my son is gone,"
And
and
then
like,
we change our minds on it.
yeah,
How much do you think? I mean, I've already talked about this multiple times, but so do you think JJ does nearly as much retconning if this movie is actually well regarded and people like it?
see, like you said, we can't know for sure, and I think that's just the way to put it. We
Yeah.
can't know for sure, and a lot of that is just who J.J. Abrams is as a storyteller, which is like maybe he would have done something different if it were received better. Maybe he would have done exactly the same thing. I don't know because J.J. Abrams doesn't end things, and who knows what his thought process was watching The Last Jedi? Who knows what his thought process was hearing about developments in The Last Jedi being an executive producer? Who knows if he was for decisions in this movie at the time of production or if he changed his mind after it came out? Who knows? J.J. Abrams is like, I can't figure him out in the context of Rise of Skywalker because I can't figure him out. Just we have nothing to go on as what does he do to end things? What does he feel about this movie? And we know other people, again, editors and stuff who worked on Rise of Skywalker and how they felt about this movie. But you really get the sense that JJ, if not Chris Terrio, have like supreme like storytelling, like carte blanche with Rise of Skywalker. And I really just don't know if he cares about the fan reception more than just his own non-existent plans.
Right.
This is my mom's favorite scene. Just like she loves the way that Kylo's like losing his mind and Luke is just like having none of it. And see, like people who like act like this movie ruined Luke and don't understand or like can't like bring themselves to see how freaking amazing and like really affirming of Luke Skywalker as a character this whole sequence is. Like I just how can you not see it? Right away, sir. And I like the bit that will come up in a couple of minutes with Finn and Poe, and I think it very briefly, succinctly, succinct like this. I love this, where Poe is like, no, Finn is like, we should go help him, and Poe's like, no, he's doing this so that we can get away and so that we can live on, and that's a sign of like Luke is great, and Luke is a hero, and he's a legend. But what makes him a worthwhile legend and a worthwhile hero in this instance is that it's not about him. He's here to ensure that they get to go on. It doesn't matter if he dies here. Luke Skywalker's story can end here. It's fine. What matters is that everyone else gets a chance to get away. And like that's what the fans have to consider, which is like, yes, Luke is great, but you should not have come to these movies just for Luke. In part, sure, but these are sequels. This is a new story Luke will play his role, and then he will be done, and his time to play a part in this story will be over.
Yeah, and that was not my issue with this movie at all. Like all the Luke stuff, I think works. The only thing that I question is that him appearing him appearing across space like this kills him when like Kylo Ren and Rey can talk to each other across light years through space, and they're both fine. They're not even exerting any real energy through the Force.
Well, that's a
Um,
completely different thing. Well, for,
I mean,
for
yeah,
Kylo,
you're constituting yourself that, and everyone is like seeing a whole like three-dimensional version of you. I get that. Um,
and
how
also Kylo and Rey literally aren't doing anything. Snoke creates a bridge between their minds.
see no see I the fact that they keep that going in the next movie, I don't know.
Again,
Like,
that's the next movie's problem.
but the
And like even then, like I think that's the next movie's problem for a different reason. Like the fact that we're gonna see that they can still see each other like in an upcoming scene. And like I'm fine with that because
yeah,
there's nothing that says that the connection dies with Snoke. Like he opened it up, nothing to say it doesn't stay open. My issue is just that I think when Rey closes the door on him, that's the movie telling us that she is done with him.
and
And
he
like,
can never do that again.
yeah. And then the next movie is the next movie.
As it is, yeah. Uh, we'll definitely agree a lot more on that one.
Yeah. And like again, I appreciate that like there are definitely things about this one that we do agree with. And like you have a very like all of your complaints are stuff that I don't agree with, but I totally understand. I'm not gonna say that you're what I've seen with a lot of the more negative reactions to this movie, which I think is just unreasonable. I don't get it. No, like I totally get where you're coming from when you have things that you don't appreciate about this movie. I just view them differently. But next movie is yeah.
I did really appreciate this, especially since I didn't even have a tie to the original trilogy when I saw this. I mean, I'd seen all those movies, at least large parts and pieces, but I didn't need Luke to come in and be the savior. I mean, in a way, he is because he helps. He is the reason that the Resistance is able to get away. But what I mean is, he doesn't like say he was actually here, right? And
Mhm.
even if he beats Kylo Ren in this duel, there's no way he just stops the rest of the First Order in that blaster by himself if he's physically here, right?
Yeah, no.
He's not. He doesn't do that. But it again, it's not about I'm so much more powerful than the villain in the
Yeah,
blasters.
it's not about a show of force. It's about saving people.
Yeah,
And that is where Rose's sentiment actually makes more sense. Where for Finn, you could read into it if you wanted, like he's doing out of spite, but I don't think it's there in that scene. It's here in this scene where he's not fighting to destroy something he hates. He's saving what he loves. He's saving the idea of hope. He's saving the resistance. He's saving his sister. He is not at any moment in this to tear down Kylo or the First Order. That's their job. In this moment, he's trying to protect people.
um, I do think it reads as kind of awkward that he says "see you around, kid" to Kylo, knowing full well that he's going to die.
And see, I and like he dies the Force Ghost death. So like no matter what happened in the next movie, I think he knows he's gonna end up like Yoda. And something else that like
But he never has a scene with Kylo again, so
but
I
I'd
mean,
I'd hope that he would have. Like that just makes so much more sense to me than what we do with him in Rise of Skywalker. Like people suggested this and I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. If Luke's role in the next movie is he's haunting Kylo as a Force ghost. But no, instead, see you around, kid, and then he never sees him around.
Yeah, it's really awkward.
But yeah, no, I would have loved that. I would have loved if Luke is almost like exclusively interacting with Kylo in Force Ghost form for the next movie.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see that because we've never seen that before. They always interact with the hero.
Mm-hmm.
You never see a Force Ghost just pop in on a Sith as they're coming up with plans to kill the Resistance or something.
Yeah.
I think the score here is really strong.
The score throughout this whole movie, like just on brand, my favorite score.
And I do think this isn't just the original trilogy score. Like it's very familiar, very reminiscent, but this is a whole new track, is it not?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And John Williams goes out of his way to avoid just reusing score wherever possible. And even if he is going to straight up redo a piece, he's going to reorchestrate it. But this, yeah, this movie is chock full of like 6 million different variations of the Force theme that are unique to this movie. Just I love that. I love that. I don't care what anyone says. That was the perfect exit for Luke's role in this story. And the score is another problem with The Rise of Skywalker that we will get into because, and I didn't know this, John Williams actually met some resistance on certain things in the score for that movie. And that movie does just straight up reuse a lot of tracks in very odd places.
Um, yeah, I really like this. This, as you say, this scene does imply, with the door closing, that they're never going to do this again. She's never going to let him talk to her through the Force again. Like we've decided where we stand. Like I'm on my line of the sand, you're in your line of the sand, and that's how it's going to be. Neither one of us are changing.
Yeah. And the dice was a weird bit. Like, even beyond just the original trilogy didn't emphasize the dice a lot outside of one deleted scene.
Yeah.
So emphasizing it in this movie was kind of weird. Like that Luke brought some force dice with him is odd.
It's really goofy.
And like, how did he know that Kylo would find them in time? That's just such a strange. That's really weird.
Yeah, I think it was really important for Luke to be the legend for this ending to work. This ending doesn't work if Luke, as I said, if he just physically shows up there, because he
Mm-hmm.
can't do what he does if he physically shows up there. He would literally have just been like stricken down. If not by Kylo, then like the Order kills him, right? Like he's just one Jedi. We're not going to pretend
Yeah.
like he could have actually done what he did physically, avoiding all those blasts, or even deflecting all those blasts with one lightsaber. Like
And
there's a scenario in which he is able to defeat the First Order if he physically shows up on that planet.
yeah, and if that does happen, then you can't have that from Rey. You can't have it wasn't sadness or pain, it was peace and purpose. Like if he like just by the sheer virtue of the fact that it's Luke Skywalker, the audience loves him. if he goes out on any terms other than his own and in any way that isn't peaceful, then the emotional context of that scene changes from a victory to, oh man, we just lost Luke Skywalker. And we can't end on that note. I love this. I love that. I don't. And see,
Him holding the mop like a lightsaber
I
or
love it.
a broom.
I
That's
love
cool.
it. And I love like kids playing with literal Star Wars toys. It's like this movie is really, really affirming and really reverent to Star Wars as an intellectual property and all of the characters that come with it and the people who look at it and say, like, there are people who look at this movie and think that Rian Johnson hates Star Wars. And I just don't understand those people. Like, how can they watch this film and get that out of it? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, uh, I'm just a diehard Clone Wars fan, and we're a few years away from Jedi Fallen Order, obviously. And the only Star Wars game that I played prior to that was Star Wars Unleashed 2. Yeah, Star Wars Unleashed 2 was the only Star Wars game I played prior to Jedi Fallen Order. Um, so my real appreciation for the franchise is more rooted in um, secondary content than these movies. Um, so like I didn't have the this is my childhood, this is everything. I mean, Clone Wars, I did grow up with that show, but I mean, um, that's I want to say that show starts 2008, like that's right after Spider-Man 3 comes out. Um, and I mean, like I'm still in middle school, but like a large part of my childhood has already passed, and like I don't have this um like rose tinted glasses like lordship over my like ownership over my franchise thing. Like I I was able to look at this series um as like with very little bias, because even though I love Clone Wars, like I can kind of, and this is gonna sound pretty vitriolic and blasphemous to any actual legitimate classic diehard Star Wars fans listening to this, but I can kind of take or leave any of these movies, to be honest. Like um I don't love any of these movies. I enjoy um the sequel I enjoy the first two movies out of the sequel trilogy.
Hmm.
um I hate the prequels. There are some redeeming things about Revenge of the Sith that, even then, the more I think about it, are more rooted in Clone Wars than that movie itself. Um, and the original trilogy, I'm just, for the most part, apathetic about. And I think A New Hope is like mind-numbingly boring. So it's like I am not, um, I'm not someone who will look at the decisions that a director makes with a new set of movies in the franchise and go, you didn't do what was in my childhood, so you hate it. You don't like it.
Yeah.
Um,
And like, I think this franchise is a special case because prior to maybe the MCU, no other, not just a movie series, but intellectual property, period, is as ingrained in the culture as Star Wars is. And that's almost entirely based on the original trilogy of movies. So trying to carry on the stories from there was always going to get a very, very strong reaction out of people. And any deviation from what people had in their minds was always going to get you some extreme backlash. But I just think the backlash to this movie was way too much. And
in large part, I think it's pretty unfounded. Like
yeah,
any complaint that you have, like, okay, if you're gonna like if the words Mary Sue even come out of your mouth, you don't have an argument worth listening to. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Um, it if the ridiculous and trite phrase that a lot of pretentious fanboys use now, SJW. If
Yeah.
that term comes out of your mouth, you don't have an argument worth listening to. I'm sorry.
If you're either of the guys in the opening of that Harley Quinn episode, basically.
I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
That was such a funny way to sell that episode.
Indeed. And like, you just know that it'll work because now they've got the guys who even disagree with that are gonna hate watch it.
Yeah. He's like, hey, I want a Snyder cut. I don't act like that. Yes, you do.
But okay, just to briefly finish up my thoughts on this movie before I then go eat because I have not had food in a long time. I consider myself a fan of this movie first and everything else in Star Wars second. That's just where I'm at. Like I'm a Last Jedi fan before I'm even a Star Wars fan at all. And I know even among people who really like this movie, that's a rare stance. So I've got no illusions about that. But I just can't help it. Like, I really, really enjoy all three of the original trilogy. I don't have what Malik has with those movies. There are even things in the prequels that I enjoy, even though I don't think any of them are really good movies. I enjoyed Force Awakens a lot. I like that movie a little bit more every time I watch it. This movie was an experience for me in the theater, and that experience, like that emotion that I have with it, and that just sheer admiration for the storytelling has not gone away. And I'll be shocked if any Star Wars related thing ever captures that for me again, honestly.
Well,
Presently
it's
shocked,
funny
but
that you say that. I have to get you to watch Clone Wars.
I know I'm trying. When I get the time, I will devote myself to that show because not just you, but a lot of people have sold me on it being like it'll get me on that level. So if anything will do that, then it'll probably be that show. But that aside, that has not happened with any other Star Wars related stuff that I've seen. I don't expect it to happen. I'll be
I think
pleasant.
there's every chance that it could, especially since, like for both you and me, the Spectacular Spider-Man is still the best interpretation of that character outside of comics.
Yeah. And like even Spectacular Spider-Man relative to Spider-Man properties didn't do like watching Spectacular Spider-Man, I don't have like an emotional reaction the way that I have watching this movie. This is one of my favorite films of all time. So like if you couldn't tell that just listening to this commentary, now that like there it is out in the open. So and we actually made it to like the end of the credits. We didn't do that last time. But yeah, I guess that's our cue to get out of here. So thank you everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you make your thoughts known in the comments. So yeah, peace out.